Hey. Hello, and welcome back to Night Shift with Andrea Up Late. Happy Tuesday, everybody. I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Homicide Lieutenant Brian Sanders. How you doing?
Oh, I'm good. I think my hat's crooked, so we're just gonna roll
my whole
with it.
Head's crooked tonight.
My head is crooked.
Welcome back, everybody. If you're new here, this is a true crime podcast that we air first as a live YouTube show, so you will hear us engage in the chats here and there at the beginning and at the end of the show, and we try to not do it so much in the middle. And then we drop to wherever you stream your audio podcast after this, so your iTunes, your Spotify, all that good stuff. So welcome, everybody, in the chats. We see you guys there. I feel like we should title this show Welcome Back to Iowa, because we've had so many. Iowa's been we've been sleeping on Iowa this whole time. I searched for cases, and who knew that they all were located there. So if you live in Iowa, just know that we may have content about you one of these days. I don't know what side of this you're going to be on, but it could be true, because it seems pretty prevalent. How are you doing, Brian
Good
Sanders?
now.
You doing good?
We're going to see. We'll see how this camera does. I've got a backup ready to go, so if this one shuts down, I'll go to the backup.
Okay. And if you're just listening, none of this matters to you whatsoever.
That's right.
We are covering a case today. It's not a new case. It is still an unsolved, as we tend to go with on this show. But I do this every time, and maybe one day I'll learn when I say, I'm just going to do something kind of straightforward, a case that I know, and it'll be a little bit less work for me, over a week or two. Wrong. It always is more. And if it's unsolved, there's going to be more details than ever, So that's what we're going to do tonight. But without further ado, the case that we are going to talk about takes place in the year 1995, and then in some subsequent years. So as we often do, we're going to have our pop culture guru, Brian Sanders, give us some pop culture from the year of 1995. This is where, if we ever download the audio, it'll be like, well, currently I'm thinking of like a Wayne's World, like the like music intro to a pop culture.
Yeah.
I kind of want it super cheesy.
Well, 95,
like
it
super
would be
on
cheesy.
The nose. All right, let's do it.
I will go out on a limb and say mid-1990s were the best movies.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And so was hip hop. I think we've had this conversation.
We have a lot. But
okay,
when we're talking about movies, the only one that I want to say, because everybody knows Forrest Gump didn't come out in 1995. But the internet will tell you it
Nope, that was 94.
Do you remember a movie called Copycat? It was 94.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wait, I do. Who is that?
Okay. It's about a serial killer.
Yeah.
Who attacks a criminal psychologist, or whatever you call him, criminologist, who is Sigourney Weaver. Sigourney Weaver. For those of you that know, it's a great YouTube clip of Al Sharpton mispronouncing her name. Sigourney Weaver plays the therapist, but she also gets agoraphobia. So she won't leave her house, and then these killings begin again or whatever. And so these detectives are trying to catch the killer. But do you know who the killer is? If my memory's right.
I remember this movie, but not well enough to, like, it's all coming. When you said Sigourney Weaver, agoraphobia, like, it's coming back to me. And I don't know, it's not going to be Kevin Spacey, but that's the only person in my brain right now.
Kevin Spacey was in Seven, which was in 1995.
Oh, I remember Seven. Vivid.
I wasn't even going to mention it because.
No, you got to mention that. It's a crime show. Seven?
I know,
Get out of here.
Man.
God. Cannot let your personal feelings affect your pop culture references, Brian Sanders. Okay,
Seven
who was the killer in Copycat?
Think of like the most just badass actor who, when you think that person is a serial killer, the actor, Harry Connick Jr.
Oh, that's right. I fully remember it now.
Yeah,
I do remember now, because he was actually creepy as hell in that movie.
He was. I think if I remember right, he did something with his teeth, or he had like false teeth.
Oh, we have to watch that. Yeah, it's been.
Yeah,
I haven't probably seen it since around that time.
Yeah, I saw it when it came out, like maybe VHS or something. But either way, I remember it being kind of cool. It could be completely cheesy, but Harry Connick Jr. is
that is a good one.
And Seven, like you just mentioned,
Seven was a great movie.
Probably, I would say for 1995 was probably the best movie.
That was a great movie
of '95, and oof, I don't care to go back and see it. It's not like Silence of the Lambs that we can watch once a month. We can even quote it like we do quite often.
What else we got?
TV, we had I say obscure show, but it's one I forgot all about. News radio.
Oh, I forgot about that too.
Yeah, probably.
Gosh,
wasn't
that was 95. Holy cow! Okay,
that's when it started. It debuted in '95. It probably picked up some steam later. But
okay.
I don't know much about TV in the mid '90s, but Joe Rogan was on that show.
Oh.
And Phil Hartman.
Well, yes, of course, Phil Hartman was. That's when Joe Rogan was kind of. Was he not like fully in Fear Factor at that point, or had that not happened yet? That might have been.
It was somewhere
Fear
around
Factor,
there, right? Yeah,
it might have been. Fear Factor might have been a couple years later.
Yeah. 1995 brought Lollapalooza. That was like the third or fourth year of Lollapalooza.
Is that the one you went to?
No, I went to 92.
Okay.
Yeah. But in 95, you had Sinead O'Connor. But I think she had to cancel because she was pregnant.
With her son, he sadly.
Yeah.
Love her.
Coolio was on the docket. Cypress Hill.
Yeah.
Beck.
Okay.
Who's kind of like thrift store rock for people who don't know. A band called Superchunk.
Okay.
That my brother actually designed one of their flyers years
Very
ago,
cool.
back in like probably 92 or 93.
Good job.
And the Mighty Mighty Ballstones, your favorite.
Okay.
All right. One of my favorite bands.
Okay.
95 was also the first year of the Warped Tour.
Oh,
which has been going on forever, and now it's kind of being brought back.
Kind of revitalized. Yeah.
Or
reinvented, reincarnated.
So that was Deftones, Civ, Sick of It All, and Sublime.
Nice.
Songs that were on the radio that people really cared about. When I Come Around. Green Day.
Yeah, I know it.
And as soon as I thought about that, I remember walking Nashville.
Oh, yeah,
downtown.
Yeah.
For some reason that pops in my head.
Oh, good album.
Possum Kingdom.
Oh, yeah.
It's a song.
Love that song.
Yeah, I think you played a lot.
I played a lot in my stories, yeah. Well, it applies.
It's a cool song. But for those that didn't know, it's by a band called Toadies. Not to be confused with Toad the Wet Sprocket.
True.
And when my cousin Abe first told me about him, I thought he was saying Totally Wet Sprocket. So then I was like,
that's for a whole different kind of show, you guys.
Well, it didn't make any sense.
That's entirely different, y'all.
He just kept talking about a band called Totally Wet Sprocket. But it's Toad the Wet Sprocket.
That's on the channels you pay for. That one.
Did you know Ozzy Osbourne had a song in 95, I guess, that people listened to on the radio called Perry Mason? I don't know. It's a true crime show, so I'm trying to make some correlations. And then probably the worst song by the worst band of all time, Oasis, did a song called Wonderwall.
I don't hate that song.
I know you don't.
They hate each other, but I don't hate that song.
If I were in Oasis, I'd hate my band members too. And in the cologne and perfumes realm.
Oh, hold on.
It was the height of cologne.
Men's or women? Men?
I'm going to hit you with one that was both men and women.
Oh, one. CK1.
CK1, yeah. That was like a marketing genius was like, we can make cologne and perfume and maximize
And then for women, I would venture to say Clinique Happy.
Yes.
There were some people that may still were doing the exclamation. Maybe that was a little bit prior, but definitely.
Not happy with exclamation.
Yeah, happy. And then for dudes, it was definitely Cool Water. I would say by then it was at its
Cool Water, Dracar Noir.
Yeah, maybe still, yeah.
But that was probably getting played out.
I think that was played out. It was Cool Water.
And then Nautica by Nautica.
Yeah, Nautica. I will say, and I've told this story, I'm not sure about on the show, but my history class, Coach Rice, what's up? In high school, whatever year that was, my history class was right after lunch. And so the way my high school was, lowerclassmen could not, but upperclassmen could leave campus for lunch, which just meant that come history it was geography class, I'm not going to name them, but a lot of the boys would come back smelling like, you'd smell like a combination of like Marlboros and pot and Nautica and Cool Water. that's if I think of geography, that's what it smells like.
Hey, don't let them throw in a slice of Big Red.
And baby, yes, definitely Big Red. I feel like it had like an uptick in the 90s.
It did. Dry ass mouth, Big Red.
It was immediately dry.
Gosh.
Remember Dentine?
I do.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I forgot about that.
Is that all for our pop culture?
Yes.
We have got a lot. You guys, you've heard me talk about my granny notes. There's a lot here. So get comfy, everybody. All right. We're going to go on and get started talking about our case. Again, it does take place in 1995. And this is the unsolved case of the disappearance of news anchor Jodi Huisentruit. So the name is pronounced this way. It's spelled a little differently, and so you'll see it when I put it all out there. But Jodi Huisentruit. So Jodi was born on June 5th, 1968 in Long Prairie, Minnesota. Jodi had a fairly uneventful upbringing until sadly her father did pass away from colon cancer when she was only 14 years old. So as Jodi grew into her teenage years, she excelled pretty quickly in golf. So she played golf all through high school. She won the state Class A tournament along with her school. That was in 1985 and in 1986. So upon graduating, Jodi enrolled in St. Cloud State University. So while her peers may have been working hard to try to kind of carve out their path in life, this did not really apply to Jodi, because she knew exactly what she wanted to do. So Jodi majored in mass communications and speech communication as well, graduating with her degree in 1990. Immediately upon graduation, Jodi gained employment with Northwest Airlines. So this was short-lived. She knew pretty early on she wanted to be behind the camera. She wanted to be a news anchor, and she had some pretty high aspirations with that. So soon enough, her dream came to fruition, and she began her broadcasting career with a CBS affiliate in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. She then made her way back to Minnesota. So she's kind of working the ladder, right? She's kind of like, getting her cred, so to speak, through these different jobs. So she starts out kind of small and kind of works her way up a little bit. So that was, let's see here. That was a CBS affiliate, and that's KGAN, and that was in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And she then made her way back to Minnesota for a job with ABC affiliate KSAX, and that's in Alexandria, before she finally returned back to Iowa for her position at CBS affiliate KIMT in Mason City. So for the rest of the show, we will be referring to the KIMT news station and Mason City, Iowa. Okay. So to all of her friends, Jodi was up for a good time. She was like, her work was a brutal schedule, as you can imagine, with a morning newscast. So she had to be at the station before 4:00 every morning to prep for the day. But she wasn't really one to turn down a celebration either. So she went to fundraisers, these golf outings. So as far as her job was concerned, Jodi was producer and anchor of the KIMT morning and noon broadcasts. So like I said, if you can picture your mornings with the local newscaster, they usually air very early in the morning, a lot of times like a 6 a.m. show. And I believe that's exactly when Jodi's first morning show started. So because of this, the way this would work is that Jodi would usually arrive at the station around 3:30 a.m. Okay. So once there, she would just go on and do her hair, do her makeup, and then they would work on the final edits there. And then they would finish getting ready for the camera. So on a mild summer morning on June 27th, 1995, this was exactly the plan. Okay. However, on this particular morning, it was a little bit different because Jodi missed her alarm. And this wasn't really the only time she had slept through her alarm. She wasn't irresponsible, but again, this is a really terrible time to be waking up in the middle of the night to get to work. So it wasn't unheard of. Although they will say, they being in the news industry, that essentially like your guillotine is missing airtime. You cannot miss when the cameras start rolling. I mean, it's just obviously that's why we don't do that for a living. We work behind these cameras, and so the time always changes. But that was kind of the case, obviously. So while she had slept in before, it never actually affected her job in the sense of she was able to kind of scurry and get there. But also her co-producer, Amy Coons, had slept in as well. So because of this, Amy and Jodi had a kind of an agreement going on that if one of them didn't arrive to the station on time, the other one would call and make sure that they had gotten up. So this morning on June 27th, Amy calls Jodi just around 4 o'clock because remember, Jodi should have been there right about 3:30. So she calls Jodi to make sure that she'd woken up. Amy has gone on to say, quote, everything sounded normal, like I'd just woken her up. Jodi asked, what time is it? She asked the question. So I told her, Jodi, it's about 10 to 4. You need to come into work. And Jodi had said, how much time is left to produce on the show? So she knew that if she got there and there's still a little bit more work to be done, she'd have a little bit of time to get ready, right? And so Amy says, I mean, she was obviously thinking, she was aware. She just knew that she had overslept and she had to get into work. I didn't hear anything out of the ordinary, nothing. So that's important for us to remember as this show goes on. So they hang up the phone and Amy continues working while she awaits Jodi's arrival, but this doesn't happen. So Jodi actually never arrives to the station that morning. And in fact, it has now been almost 30 years and no one has seen Jodi or talked to her since that we know of anyway. So Amy called Jodi once more around 5:10 a.m. and she got no answer. So she finally had to get on with running the show and going on to kind of hop in the anchor seat, which was not what she was going to be doing that morning. So she's doing this without Jodi. And after the morning rush of the station and the show kind of comes and goes, her coworkers call the Mason City Police Department and request a welfare check. So that should show you to, just Jodi's responsibility. Like she would normally be there. It would be unheard of for her not to be. And their concern was obviously valid and well-intentioned. But, I don't feel like you call for a welfare check just on a whim.
Yeah.
So they clearly were a bit questioning what was going on that morning. So the police arrived to Jodi's apartment complex around 7:16 a.m. They immediately see Jodi's red Mazda Miata in the parking lot. This was a fairly new car to Jodi, and we're going to discuss this at length a little bit later on in the show. So while her actual apartment was undisturbed, it quickly became evident that whatever took place seemed to take place there in the parking lot. We often discuss, what is our crime scene? And as, I think in a broad sense, would you agree, Brian, that we're going to look at her apartment and the parking lot? But if you can see that something very specific took place in one or the other, that's probably where we're concentrating our efforts. Would you say?
Yes. Yeah, parking lot and the residence.
Okay. You can speak more than.
Well, I didn't want to.
No, you're good. You're good. So they're in the parking lot, directly beside the driver's side of Jodi's car. So they're on the pavement, again, on the driver's side of the Miata. Officers observed Jodi's belongings strewn on the pavement. They found a bottle of hairspray, a hairdryer, earrings, Jodi's red high heel shoes, and a car key belonging to her Miata, and the car key was actually bent. Now, picture slightly bent. It wasn't like a 90-degree angle, but it clearly shouldn't have been bent at all. So it became apparent early on that a struggle had ensued, likely while Jodi was rushing out the door and attempting to unlock her car to get to work. Not a whole lot was left behind to process in the sense of fingerprints and DNA and these types of things that they were aware of at the time. There were also, I'm about to show you some photos if you're watching now on YouTube, but there were also some pretty specific like drag marks noted beside the car. So like I said, they could tell that whatever happened right there, and it very likely involved a bit of a struggle. So police were able to lift a singular palm print, which will be the topic of endless discussion for for 30 years until currently, and one strand of hair. To this day, no palm print, has ever been matched as far as we civilians know. And as you know, as for the public, we also don't know about the identification of the hair. It's kind of been made to the public. Again, this is unsolved, right? So it's an ongoing case. So there are going to be things that we don't know. Reference any case that we've talked about, Bill and Peggy Stevenson, Delphi, any of the ones that had been unsolved for so long, even though this much time has gone by, we still don't have a perpetrator. So everything still has to be kept quiet and kept, the integrity of the case has to be absolutely monitored and really cared for. And so in that sense, we have kind of gotten musings that the palm print has not been matched, but we don't know about the strand of hair. I think that the assumption would be that it has not been matched, or it came back to be Jodi's or whatever, but it's just not been mentioned to any of us. So this is what I was actually asking you to call. I asked Brian to call the Mason City Police Department just to get an idea from that very specific agency what their protocol would have been in 1995, because I was curious, and we're going to discuss why here in a moment, as to if when someone, when intake takes place at that location in 1995, would it have been common practice to take a palm print, the entire whole handprint, or just fingerprints? And so I believe you called a few times and you guys kind of played phone tag.
Yeah. And so I didn't get a direct answer from them.
Okay. What would you say in your experience in terms of the palm print?
It's a good question because I was not a cop in 95 and I cannot remember
when something like that
that started. I remember when almost like the edge of the palm, which sounds weird, but at one point in our jurisdiction, that was part of uploading almost like the edge of your palm. So part of your palm print, but like almost like rolling it sort of.
And to be fair, it's not indicated to civilians what portion of the palm print, right? So it's only listed as palm print. So
yeah,
I don't know if it's an entire palm print, if it is just a partial. But either way, so just know that was pretty much when they kind of lifted, right? When they tried to assess and test for anything left behind naked to the human eye, that's really all they got. So it wasn't like we have copious amounts of fingerprints or anything else like that, or glove prints. Sometimes we'll find like a glove print. And that was also not the case. So please, of course, start interviewing the neighbors. Now, keep in mind, and we're going to talk a little bit more about it. Let me go on and show you guys if you're listening on YouTube. As always, if you are listening via just an audio podcast, I will go on and put these pictures on my Instagram at Andrea Up Late in the next day or two. Here's an idea of the apartment complex, and there is a picture of Jodi with a news camera in the upper left corner. This is not a large apartment complex at all. In fact, it's rather small. There are 3 residential units, and they are labeled A, B, and C. Jodi lived in Unit C, and there were 2 parking lots to go along with those 3 units, one more in the front and one more in the back. So Jodi's Unit C faced toward the back parking lot. So that's what is referenced here in this photo. If you're just listening, it's a really, really small parking lot. When you think of apartment complex, complex seems like a bigger word for this than really, what it would be. Like it's kind of just 3 units there. So we have a photo there. We've got this one, even though it's 1995, these pictures look like they're from 1978 for some reason. And this would just be investigators kind of getting to the scene, starting to just comb through everything. What would you say? So like in a scenario like this, Brian, with your experience, what would you say is kind of the first? You see a guy here, it looks like he's dusting the lamp pole.
Yeah.
What are some of the first things you're taking into consideration or thinking about when you arrive to something like this? It had been a welfare check and you see potentially signs of a struggle, personal belongings strewn about by the car, and a bent car key.
Yeah. So if I don't know yet that it's a news anchor or a journalist like that, secure the scene, and then you set up large perimeters. That's the thing too, that
it doesn't look like that was necessarily happening here, but this
been a while, but you start large. You rope everything off as you possibly can, because you can always shrink your crime scene. But you can't start small and then all of a sudden
That's a better one.
allow, people driving around and walking around your crime scene, and then you try to expand it because it's all been contaminated. So it helps to have the car there in the parking lot and then to have items on the ground, so at least sort of the area you're working in. But you keep it large like that. I think the one photo you had, it appeared that, you don't have to go back, but it appeared that someone was fingerprinting the pole with the light on the end. One of the first things I would want to know is, and you wouldn't be able to tell maybe necessarily during the daytime like that, but was that light functional? And was it functional the day prior? And then now is it not functional? Because, and I'm quite sure that's why they're fingerprinting it.
Yeah.
If somebody messed with the lighting so that therefore they could just sit out there in the dark waiting for her, which would then tell you a lot more about the person.
Right.
And
if you're just listening, this light pole, it's not what you might picture in a parking lot for an apartment. This isn't like a 30-foot tall light pole. This pole is maybe 6.5 feet tall. Like, if the guy's 5'10", 5'11", standing beside it, this isn't a very tall light pole. It almost looks like a floor lamp in the middle of the parking lot, for reference. So that's a really good point. Okay, so as you saw in those pictures, I also showed you a picture of Jodi. And so they are at the point now to start interviewing some neighbors. So we do find out pretty early on that 2 to 3 different neighbors stated they had heard a woman's scream sometime just after 4 a.m. or so on the day she disappeared. That's always haunting. This isn't the first, and sadly won't be the last time we hear reports like that from neighbors. What do you do, right? I mean, people aren't often going to call the police because they think they woke up to a scream.
Yeah.
And this is certainly the instance where you think, oh gosh, but maybe, like if you had a maybe, but who's going to,
And I've had people tell me in the past, well, I didn't want to call. I mean, even with gunshots, well, I didn't want to call because I didn't want to bother 911. I didn't think it was a complete emergency. And it's kind of like, you can always call with stuff like that.
Yeah.
Even if you wake up at 4 a.m. and hear somebody scream, even if you just call, they're going to document it, and it may or may not be anything.
For sure. So 2 to 3 people did hear a woman scream, and they all independently, kind of corroborated that time, which absolutely lines up to when. And remember, it's a very important piece of the puzzle that we have that her coworker Amy called her at 10 till 4. So it makes sense then that if something happened in the parking lot, it would be just after 4. She's in a hurry. She's scrambling. She's got her things. I will say, because I don't want to drone on about it later, something that some of the people there's a big organization called findjodi.com. They've got multiple podcasts, multiple news sources and articles out there that they've really kind of covered this case. What that's comprised of multiple journalists, investigators, retired investigators, people like that from the country, all over the country, who have really used all of their efforts to keep working on Jodi's case for many, many years now. So that's an endless bowl of information there. But one of the really well-versed women who has been on this and really done some wonderful interviews and given a lot of information, she does seem to be concerned with Jodi's bag, because it was known from coworkers that she almost always had this like kind of obnoxiously large bag with her. It was kind of a joke about, here's Jodi with that giant bag again every time she kind of comes swooping in the news station in the morning, right? And so for sure, that could be something that's missing, that's with the killer, that's with wherever Jodi or her remains may be right now. Or maybe that day she just didn't take it with her, and she literally bundled all of this stuff that I just listed to you in her hands. And when she gets out there, whatever happens, and they all drop, meaning her shoes, because why would she put the heels on right then? She goes to the station to get ready. Clearly she had her hairspray, her hair dryer. So she may or may not have just rinsed off in the home, literally rushed out the door within 12 minutes and just carried all that in her arms. So again, just remember that phone call timestamp from her coworker is very, very important, because we at least know that Amy was alive and at home at that time. Neighbors also noted some beer cans lined up in the parking lot near kind of like a partial wall or perimeter. And so evidently it was noted that from this vantage point, Jodi's apartment window could be visible. And that's going to be important on some things that I tell you that Jodi was concerned about here a little bit later on. And lastly, neighbors mentioned seeing a white Ford van because, of course they did, right? Loitering in the apartment parking lot. So all agreed that this wasn't a vehicle that normally resides there. This was compared to something kind of like a Ford Econoline van. Okay, so like your big typical van. So mention of the van and the notion of the beer cans in view of her window both corroborate potentially the idea of a stalker or someone who had been paying attention to Jodi. So remember, Jodi was not only very well liked in the community, she was a social butterfly. I mean, like, it sounds like she knew everybody. In fact, one of the sources said that if Jodi went to the grocery store, it may take her 2 hours before she comes home because she stopped and talked to everybody that she sees while she's there. Can you relate to that?
I can relate 100%.
But more so, she was a talking head, right? A public figure. So remember in 1995, 24-hour news was not really a mainstay. You didn't get your current events from social media. Local news stations were well known amongst towns throughout the country. So you'd wake up with them on TV. Good morning, Demetria Kalodimos. That was my girl in the morning. That's what I said. You'd have your cup of coffee. You'd get ready for your day. And then again in the evening, actually, you'd watch the last bit of news for the day before turning in. So it was widely accepted that Jodi was pretty much a big fish in a small pond there in Mason City, Iowa. And if you remember this, if you're of an age where everybody was watching the local news because you didn't have anything else to watch, it was that way. And you typically had the same sportscasters, news anchors, weathermen, for the mainstay for many years. And so you do kind of feel like you get, to know these people. And we know that people get fixated, right? So it's not necessarily a stretch that this could have been the case with Jodi. Also, keep in mind, you youngins that might be listening, that we had something called phone books back then, okay? So this was an alphabetical book that came to your doorstep. It was delivered to you, and it had everyone in the town, and it's going to have your name, address, and your phone number in it, unless now you could write in or call into the company that makes the phone books and say, hey, I want mine to be unlisted. It was called unlisted, and then you'd have like a private number. But Jodi's was not. Okay, so we may take that for granted now because with the internet, it's way too easy to find any information you want to on anyone, right? Looking at you, Jerry Burns. But then this would not be the case at that time, right? So you'd have to have the phone book to get their information. And like I said, name, address, and phone number. So Jodi's was listed there down to her apartment unit number. So if you watch the news at that time and you decide that you have a fixation on Jodi, and you can now call her, you can go to her place of residence, you know exactly where she's going to be. Okay. So in Jodi's apartment, one thing that a lot of people keep coming back to is the fact that when police arrived, the toilet seat in her apartment was up. Okay. So obviously this causes speculation that there could have been a man there. Had there been? Had he been there overnight? Had he been there the week before? Was he there that morning? What's going on with this raised toilet seat? Jodi did live alone. Or you, I think, have to think like, had Jodi been sick? We don't know. Had Jodi been sick? Had she cleaned the toilet the night before? Whatever. Either way, you'd think that by the morning time, maybe that she would have lowered the seat to go to the restroom before leaving for work. And I said this as I discussed it with Brian yesterday, and then I had to remember that she was 27 years old. And at 27 years old, you can sleep through the night and maybe not have to rush to the restroom before you leave for work, especially since she was already in a hurry, right? Yeah. She had been woken by this phone call after not showing up. So best speculation is that she was probably feverishly rushing out the door. But maybe not, okay? So when I looked at her apartment and I looked up where her apartment was, in reference to the distance to the KIMT TV station, and they're only exactly 1.3 miles apart. So this would be a 3-minute drive. So it could make sense that she rinsed off, because she had her hairdryer with her. So I think good speculation is that she showered and was out the door quickly. And if she had to go to the restroom, she'd, get to work, drink her coffee, and just go there. So she could have been waiting to get to the TV station. But why was the lid up after all, right? And so that's what we kind of want to know about. Was this the only bathroom, or maybe had a man been there some days prior? So obviously think about that. If there were 2 bathrooms in her apartment, one could have been up for the last 6 weeks, because she may have a male visitor that kind of comes and goes, and he tends to go in there. But again, if it's her only bathroom, I think that the obvious conclusion would be that likely the lid would be lowered, right?
Yeah.
If she's, by the time she's home alone, it would likely be lowered. So that just, it's not the biggest deal, but it's a part of that puzzle that you want to tuck away in that box back there, because it's just something different. Obviously, it's probably something out of the ordinary for Jodi when she's home alone. So I looked into this a little bit. So Jodi's apartment at 550 North Kentucky Avenue in Mason City, Iowa, it's still in existence. Not much really has changed with them at all. It looks like they've replaced some carpet and just updated a few fixtures on the inside of the apartment complex. The outside doesn't look a lot different than the photo I showed you. It's still got the same name. It's called the Key Apartments. Online searches show that you can rent units between $450 and $750 a month. And you can choose from a 1 or 2 bedroom. So like a studio or a 2-bedroom, 1-bath unit. So as of today, all of the units only have the option of 1 bathroom, regardless of if you choose a 1 or 2 bedroom. Okay. So I think that it stands to show that likely they haven't decreased the number of bathrooms in renovations in the last 30 years. That would be unlikely. So I just think that reasonable conclusion is that they probably had 1 bathroom in 1995 as well. I did call the office for the apartments. One of the numbers listed online is completely out of service. The other one works, but you kind of get a half of a guy's voicemail after it rings 10 times every time. So it called over and over just to kind of confirm, just one more piece to figure out a little bit. But either way, I think the assumption is that likely she had 1 bathroom and it had the toilet seat up. Okay. So keep that information tucked away. All right, let's discuss Jodi's activities leading up to her disappearance. Who was Jodi? Who did she hang out with? Who were her friends? Would you say that that's probably one of the first things you start working when you look at victimology?
Exactly. You look for their pattern, which would be her work, where she's not, where she's supposed to be, her friends, family, who knows her the best, who could even tell you, yeah, she's got a Miata, or her car key to her Miata is actually bent. She used to complain about it all the time.
Right.
Then you could go, okay, well, that's not a
part of the, yeah.
And then also like the actual neighbors, you'll hear the term canvas in law enforcement. It basically just means detectives or officers knock on the doors of every location that's visible to your crime scene. So in these apartment complexes, like you were saying, the neighbors were providing information. That's what the canvas is. Sadly, a lot of agencies are getting away from canvas.
I was just going to say it. Because of cameras?
Well, yeah, they get very lazy. They go, well, we'll just pull cameras. The problem is you've now got more. You got cameras and people. Why not use both? So the canvas is incredible because the person that doesn't call 911 will tell you when you make it real easy at their doors, their front door, and go, yeah, last night I did hear a woman screaming. I feel bad I didn't call 911, but that's no problem. What exactly did it sound like? Because like you said, it could be guttural. Sadly, like we heard the young man out in the ocean the other day, like you hear it and it's a different sound. It's not just someone yelling or being silly. It's guttural.
That was horrible.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that at the end. We had to call 911 this weekend.
So, but the canvas and victimology, you start to paint a picture because all you have is a missing person. You don't have the decedent on scene, or you don't have someone who's injured going to the hospital and dying. All you have is a missing person. So that's how you start to work it. And then obviously with this one is good because she was supposed to be leaving her house and going to a location less than 2 miles away, a mile and a half away. And so when she doesn't show up and they go and do the check on welfare, the items in the parking lot, all that looks like she made it to the car, but then was confronted. And when I back up, when you were talking about the beer cans, when I was mentioning a crime scene earlier, That's why you go large like that and you look around for everything. Cigarette butts, chewing gum wrappers, anything that looks fresh, that doesn't look weathered. And especially things like that, like beer cans, that back then you'd still be able to fingerprint. Like now we'd be getting DNA samples, but you could fingerprint. And guess what? If it's the neighbor, then people would go, oh, it's the neighbor's fingerprints. Now it's not our suspect.
Right.
But that neighbor sits out there and drinks and can also tell you the pattern of behavior in that parking lot, and can then maybe tell you white van, or, hey, there's a new guy who's been hanging around that doesn't live here.
Right.
Yeah.
And we're going to have some of that because the neighbors actually, again, I think it does help a little bit that it was kind of a smaller complex like that, a lot easier to see who comes and goes. The patterns like that are a little bit easier to keep up with. And we do have neighbors over the next little bit when we start talking theories and suspects that are really, that come forward and give a lot of information on that. Now, and as far as the beer cans in the parking lot are concerned, we as civilians don't know what has come of that, right? So like, I would like to assume they've been tested. I can't say that they for sure were. We don't have all the evidence lists. We don't have all of these things since it's ongoing. But if they have been tested, if anything has come of that, that's not been made public to us, right? So that's something to also keep in mind. All right. So the day before Jodi disappeared, she was set to participate in a golf tournament. So I talked about this a little bit earlier, but Jodi participated in just about everything she had an option to be in around town. So if it was fundraisers or parties or these golf tournaments. So she was a regular at the country club. On the day prior, she was all set to participate in this tournament. And just a little bit back to what you were saying with the victimology. Unfortunately, in this case, with Jodi being, even though it's a small town public figure, I feel like that probably can broaden your suspect base quite a bit if you don't already have, kind of strong leads in one way or another. So something that often gets misreported is her participation in this golf tournament. Okay. So not that it necessarily matters, but you will read sources that say that she was in this tournament and whatever. Actually, the weather changed. And so the tournament was rained out. So everyone kind of convened back inside the club and mingled for the evening. So that evening, she visited her friend named John Van Cise. And are we going to talk about John Van Cise? So get comfy for this. Who was John? John had once lived in Jodi's apartment complex, but she didn't know him from that time. Okay, so that's not how she met him. She and a friend of hers actually met John at a bar. It was approximately 6-7 months prior to her disappearance when she met John at the bar. And evidently, per her friend, they weren't exactly sure how to think about him at first, but he started buying them drinks, and then they kind of kept running into him. So then they kind of all got a little bit closer and closer. John was a seed salesman that was recently divorced. Now, at this time, John did have the breathalyzer on his car. I looked up one of his little background report things, and I think I've got listed, I don't even know, from this time until essentially present day, 6-7 DUI, like a ton of DUIs, and then tickets for driving with a suspended license, because then he'd still drive once he got his license taken away for the DUIs. Okay. So this was, a lot of these took place before the whole 3 strikes situation that kind of seems to be the case now. So at this time, he was recently divorced, kind of a mess, honestly. He was recently divorced, but like I said, he had the breathalyzer on his vehicle. He was 22 years older than Jodi. Okay. So if she's 27 years old, he's 49, 50 years old at this time. He soon became part of Jodi's inner circle. So it didn't take very long for him to really ingratiate himself upon her friend group. And it became apparent to some of Jodi's friends that John had quite an interest in Jodi. So per pretty much all of her friends, Jodi would just brush this off. She would refer to him as one of her good friends. Her friends say that if anyone mentioned John's romantic interest in her, that Jodi would just kind of blow it off and say, no, he's like a father to me. I will say to you that when she's 27 and he's, let's say, rounded out to 50 years old, that could be like a father to her, because for a 27-year-old, 50 can seem quite old at that
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
To a 50-year-old man, a 27-year-old woman may not be a far-fetched idea for him romantically. Okay. He's very likely not looking at her like a daughter. It doesn't seem to be.
Yeah.
Okay. This probably wouldn't have been very favorable for John to hear if he was interested in pursuing a relationship with Jodi. So John actually named his boat after Jodi. I'll pull some clips. I tried before now. That will get kind of misrepresented because then sometimes it'll say, no, he didn't. And so technically, the man didn't have a yacht that he painted and christened as, Jodi, the boat. But his accounts are that you colloquially name a boat. You can get a John boat and say, oh yeah, I named her Sally, whatever. So he says, I named her Jodi, and he'll say it's because she was Jodi. You just had to love the woman. I don't know. He's always kind of whatever. Kind of creeps me out when he talks a little bit. But so he did name the boat after Jodi. A good friend of Jodi's, also a co-worker at the station, anchor Robin Wolfram, said, quote, when he said he named his boat after her, that's when I said, that's an obsession. I remember holding onto the microphone and just feeling so ill, so ill at ease, and thinking to myself, I think he might have done it. So obviously this was after Jodi's disappearance. Now this Robin didn't say at the beginning, oh, look at John Van Sice. I think John did this. But she will later go on to say that she was just not super comfortable with John relationally with Jodi. So 2 weeks prior to Jodi's disappearance, John and another one of Jodi's friends threw her a surprise birthday party. I do think it's kind of funny to note that on the invitation for Jodi's surprise birthday party, John had written at the bottom, hosted by John Van Sice and friends. It was quite literally one of her girlfriends and him that put it on together. But he named himself in it. So that the weekend before her disappearance, that same friend group went water skiing on John's boat. Okay. There's a little bit of knowledge of, as they're kind of water skiing and hanging out on the boat and meeting up with other people with boats, that at some point Jodi and a girlfriend of hers kind of walked away and hopped on a different boat with these two guys that they didn't know, kind of younger guys, probably closer to their age than John's. And John was not very favorable to this. He didn't love that. Some friends' accounts will say that he kind of was watching, keeping an eye on the girls. They were just kind of sitting on the front of the boat, having a couple of drinks, just kind of having fun, mingling on these boats. But just a little side note there. So the evening before Jodi vanished, okay, the night before she went missing, the timeline is that she left that golf event, she went to John's house, and then she went home. So phone records show that calls were made around 8:24 p.m. that evening from her home. Again, remember, no cell phones, okay? So, cell phones were starting to come around, but Jodi did not have one. So if a call was made from her landline apartment, it's going to indicate, in theory, that Jodi was home, okay? When asked about what happened when Jodi went to John's that night, he states that they watched the film that John made during Jodi's birthday party that he threw. So it's like Jodi came over to sit with him so he could put on the video of the film that he filmed for her birthday that he threw. Okay. He said, these are John's words. He says, quote, and we watched the tape and we chuckled, we laughed, we giggled, we hee-hawed, we did everything. We said, we're going to cut out this portion of the tape. We're going to cut out that portion of the tape. And then we'd laugh about it. That's fine if you guys were having just a fun, silly moment and you're seeing your friends act a fool on a video camera. I can kind of see some of this. What I think the most important thing, though, is when you listen to John talking, he did multiple interviews early within the first week of Jodi's. I'm not sure how many he did in the first week of her disappearance, starting within 24 to 48 hours after she was noted missing. We're talking a current affair, local affiliates, her coworkers at the other station, the KIMT station. And for someone who cared for her so much, he's not showing an ounce of like remorse, like sadness or
That was what I was
worry
going to ask. Yeah.
when he
Okay.
talks. In fact, what he'll keep saying is, you know, we can't get down because Jodi just wouldn't want us to be down. Jodi liked us to be happy.
Did it remind you of Jeffrey McDonald when he was on like Letterman and all those shows?
Ooh, we got to cover that case.
Yeah. But is it similar to that where it's almost like I enjoy all this attention I'm getting right now?
100%.
Even though the
person that I care so much about is gone.
Yeah.
This young woman, this 27-year-old vulnerable woman. Yeah. John has also said that, quote, you're going to like this one. Hey, if you ever go in her apartment and you see men's clothes, they're mine. If I had a shirt she liked, you know, I'd wear it for a while and then I'd give it to her. Like, he didn't even say she's like asking for it. You know what I mean? Like, he's like,
yeah,
I'm going to I will grace you with my things. Like, does it sound that way to you? Like, let me.
Or he's explaining it exactly how it was. And he's thinking like, oh, this is so cool. And it sounds just like that. Like she wasn't asking for his shirts, but he was offering them. You know, like, yeah.
Okay. We're going to hear a little bit more about just at least, you know, if we can't get into the mind that well of John Van Cise, we're going to at least find his perspective on Jodi. All right. So the car that was in the parking lot, if you remember, was Jodi's 1991 Mazda Miata. So like I told you earlier, she had just recently gotten this car and it was her pride and joy. It was red. If you're not familiar with a Miata, it's a teeny tiny car, right? They are teeny tiny. They're low to the ground. It's got not much space inside, not much trunk space. Hers was a convertible. Many people will point out very converse to living in Iowa where you're months of snow, all these things.
Yeah.
But it was just kind of her personality. She wanted this fun little car to whip around in. And she was super cute. And I think she just enjoyed having it. But like I said, she'd only had it for 3 weeks. So there is some misreporting a bit about this because the title comes back to not be in Jodi's name. So initially, during the very beginning of the investigation, there was a little confusing time. Like, was this actually her car? Did she own this car? Had it been gifted to her? Do we need to follow down that person? Who gave her this car? Who's this person on the title? Let's talk to this guy, right? And so ultimately what we found out is that, yes, Jodi bought it through just a personal sale, like a stranger that was selling this car. She bought it from this man. And she just hadn't gotten around yet to getting the title transferred over. The man says that the only time, and this all comes back, he's never a suspect. It's corroborated. The only time he ever met her once was to give her the keys to the car, like as they exchanged money. Like that was it. So, so it really wasn't that big of a deal. Ultimately, you will still read in some sources that, you know, reported it from very early on, musings that this had been a gift to her. And that was not the case. Jodi purchased it. So the copy of the search warrant for her Miata reads, this license is listed to John Lessard, the previous owner, pending title transfer. So John Lessard was a prominent businessman around town. He actually told 48 Hours that the sale to Jodi was arranged by a friend who was a car salesman. The friend had since died. The friend's son remembers the sale. So this was all on the up and up. She just hadn't gotten around. And look, I feel you, Jodi. These kinds of things are never fun to have to go get things like this done when you're busy working and all these kinds of things. Okay. So the car in question evidently had been weighing on John Van Cise's mind. We are not done talking about John. So his close friend, so John had a good friend named LaDonna Woodford. And LaDonna says that John told her that the car was a birthday gift to Jodi, must have been from a boyfriend.
Say that again. I'm sorry.
So John Van Cise, the older dear friend to Jodi, tells his good friend that Jodi's Miata was a birthday gift to her from, must have been her boyfriend. Okay. So we know that Jodi didn't say this to John because that's not how she obtained the car. Yeah. And if she was so proud of it and she purchased it, there's no way she's saying that this rando, no one gave it to her, right?
Yeah.
So LaDonna goes on to say that John said, but she doesn't want the car. She's going to give it back to him.
So he's just kind of cooking some
He's
stuff
cooking
up.
stuff up, yeah. I don't know if it's to make his own self jealous, like he's self-perpetuating this, something that he's made up. But he's making up this story to his friend to say, oh, yeah, this was a gift from a boyfriend, but she doesn't even want it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as they discuss it, Jodi's other friend, Annie, says she never said anything to anyone about a gentleman buying it for her or paying for it or anything like that. So I think that that's hogwash. So that's what she says at the beginning before they for sure come back to say, oh, no, she bought it. That was her only indication.
Okay.
And we learned that, in fact, it was hogwash. So Annie goes on to say, if we were out somewhere, if she was visiting with somebody, John would come join the conversation. He wanted to make sure that everybody knew Jodi was his. So this is her girlfriend saying this. This is also one of the friends that had been on the boat water skiing with them. And so she had been around Jodi, around John multiple times. So John Van Sice's friend, LaDonna, that I just mentioned to you a moment ago, states that she knows exactly where John was that day in June. She says that he was actually with her on the morning of Jodi's disappearance. Okay. So she'll go on to say they didn't have cell phones, so she knows he was home. She says that she called John at 6:00 that morning on June 27th. This would be the morning that we learned that Jodi had gone missing around 4 a.m., right?
Mm-hmm.
And she says, I said, hey, John, we going to work out today? And she says that LaDonna believes that John, even though he only lived 5 minutes away, so remember what I just said, 5 minutes away from Jodi, wouldn't have had time to abduct Jodi, potentially dispose of her body, and be home by 6 a.m. If she disappeared, we heard screams, right? Around 10 after 4.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. 5 minutes away.
Yeah.
We're looking at almost 2 hours.
Mm-hmm. Plenty of time.
And who's to say that wherever something was disposed of is where it wound up living forever, right? We could just handle stuff initially. So LaDonna will say, when I called him, when I met with him, when we walked, it's almost impossible for him to have done this. So she says that they go for a walk, that she made a call to a friend at a different time to say, oh, hey, we're here. So it's kind of an interesting part of the interview when she says, so he said to me, oh, I'm not even out of bed yet. I haven't had my coffee. So he wasn't up and ready for the walk. But she says it was a routine thing that they always did.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And she said, I just thought that sounded odd. So when she called him, of course, he could have slept in as well, just like Jodi did that morning. Who knows? But when she called him, her words were that he said, what time is it? Oh, I'm not sure. I'm not out of bed yet. I haven't had coffee yet. And then LaDonna goes on to say that John said, well, can we just meet somewhere closer to my place then, since I'm not out of bed yet? And she says, okay. And so then she goes nearer his house to a walking area. They go for a walk. And she says while they're on a walk, she actually stops at a payphone and calls a friend of hers. And it was just an interesting point in the interview. It's tough to articulate exactly why. When you listen to her, though, when she said, and so I called my friend to let them know that we were going for a walk, but that we're not where we usually go for a walk, so that if anybody wanted to come, this is where we were. But they had already been walking for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
Now, payphone records do corroborate the fact that a call was made to this number at the time that she states, from the payphone that she said she made a call from.
Okay.
Of course, we don't have what was said on the call, but we have that call was made. Okay. So just something to keep in mind. Police did finally confirm in the fall of 1995 that Van Sice had passed a polygraph test, which was something that he'd been telling his friends all along. He did remain on their radar. In fact, that never went away. So something to note that is on the morning of June 27th, John Van Sice called the KIMT station. Okay. So he calls the station where Jodi is supposed to be at work the same morning that she disappeared. He asks if Jodi had come to work that day. Amy, her coworker, they're the one who actually made the call to Jodi to wake her up that morning, stated that Jodi had not come to work. So John pressed her with some more questions, and finally he asked why. Why didn't she come to work? And he asked her if she was sick.
That's interesting.
Isn't it? He also showed up to the apartment while police were rolling in. Now, this, I think we can easily say that if the phone call to the station was under good intentions, full speculation here.
Oh, yeah.
The night before she was at his house, she said, I don't feel great. My stomach hurts. That's why the toilet lid's up. That's why she slept in. That's why he called to check on her, because maybe he called her house, but she didn't answer. So he's calling the station. Or maybe it was after the news broadcast and he hadn't seen her on the screen. So he's calling to see, not really any of his business, to be fair, but, you know, and when she doesn't answer and she hadn't shown up to work, then he runs over to her house to check on her.
Yeah.
That's potentially okay. All right. But he rolls up to the apartment while police were rolling in and tells them that he was the last person to see her. It's the first thing he says to him. I was the last person to see Jodi last night.
Okay.
So this is interesting because knowing what we know that investigations tend to look heavily initially at the last person to have been around a victim. Okay. It's interesting that John would come and immediately offer that up. And I guess there's a couple of reasons here, maybe, right? So is it because he does want to insert himself, as some perpetrators do? They want to be all about it. They want to be in it. They want to see the searches. They want to, you know, or is it because he kind of like her friend said, kind of took claim of Jodi? Like he had this weird, you know, obsession that maybe didn't border on murder, but he, you know, kind of wants to make it known that they were together, that he had been with her, you know. I guess as of right now, that could have gone either way, right? Now let's talk about this timeline because like I wrote Michelle, I told you it was going to happen at some point. Jodi is said to have phoned a friend at 8:24 the night before her disappearance. Okay. But from witness accounts, she didn't actually leave the golf event until between 7:45 and 8 p.m. Okay. So that's going to give her, everything was close by. So to keep that in mind, everywhere she's kind of, all these locations we're talking about are pretty close to each other. But this is only going to give her, let's say, 25 to 30 minutes to leave the golf event, drive to John's, watch that videotape with him, hee-haw and guffaw and giggle with him, or whatever he said that they did that night, and go home and then make this call. Okay. So this is a pretty tight timeline for sure. It could be, you know, on the findjodi.com, those investigators and journalists and stuff, you know, make mention that like, okay, well, maybe we got it wrong. Maybe she left the golf event, went home, you know, changed into something, whatever, made these phone calls to her friends, and then went to John's. What we don't know, though, is John's account of that time. Like, so we don't know what investigators have to make them seem pretty certain that it went in this direction, from the golf event to John's to her house, which is a very tight. I don't feel like John was one that would want her to come and go very quickly. I could see him lingering with goodbyes, whatever. I understand that speculation, but that is a very, very tight timeline. Very different than the timeline the next morning, where he did have a couple of free hours.
Yeah.
That he wasn't alibied for, which I understand is not necessarily unusual at the 4 o'clock in the morning hour when you live alone. I mean, you can always say you're home, you know, sleeping alone. And but just, these are some things that, like, you know, we talk about it often, but when things generally kind of consistently, little bitty things don't add up. And right now we've got, like, if you're keeping track of that little box that we put all these ideas in, we got quite a handful, just concerning this one particular train of thought with John. Okay. So it is important to know, if you would like for me to throw a couple more wrenches in all of this, that 9 months approximately before Jodi's disappearance, she'd complained to friends about being freaked out that someone was stalking her. Okay. So she said that while she had been out jogging, a truck kind of followed her, and kind of no matter what turn she was taking, this truck seemed to be slow moving on her tail. It was a small white pickup, and she actually was shaken up enough by this that she did file a police report. Mm-hmm. So there is misreporting on this as well, because misreporting has confused it for a black pickup truck for a while. So again, this is another one of those things where you may read some accounts that, mention a black pickup truck, and that's not true. In her police report, she states that it was a small white pickup. The March before her June disappearance, she inquired with someone about self-defense classes. And as far as to the day before her disappearance, she told her friends at that golf event, the one just prior to her going missing, that she had been receiving what she called, quote, annoying phone calls. Now, we've discussed these. I believe it was Dorothy Scott. We talked about these phone calls she would get at this time in 1995. Again, it's not cell phone usage. You don't have the internet. There's a lot of things that we have now that you can figure stuff out, figure out who's calling, figure out, mm-hmm. And that was not the case. You can block a number and make a phone call really quickly. That's to say if she even had caller ID, right? So with that, we don't know what she meant by annoying phone calls, but it could be, it could have been pretty yucky or not. But either way, she had had an incident 9 months prior where she was concerned about someone following her on the road while she jogged. She made the police report. She had made an inquiry about self-defense classes in March, 3 months prior to her disappearance. And the day before she disappeared, she tells her friends about these phone calls she was receiving. And she actually had plans the next day to change her phone number.
Dang. Okay.
So clearly, sadly, something had been really bothering her. Because as much as they do talk about her going out all the time and being a social butterfly and talking to strangers in the supermarket because they recognize her from the news, mm-hmm. I think that for someone like her, it probably takes kind of a lot to get to actually get really kind of freaked mm-hmm. out by something like this. So check this out. Let's put John Van Cise to bed for a moment, okay? And let's retrain your brain to go in a different direction. So in late January 1998, so this would be 3 years after Jodi's disappearance, it was January, so maybe 2.5 years, someone else about 140 miles away was starting to look for answers. And so this woman's name is Caroline Lowe. She was an investigative reporter in Minneapolis. And so she started reporting on Jodi around the time she was actually covering instead a crime spree in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. So she said that she had been covering a serial rapist. This man was accused of going on this spree that we're about to talk about. His name was Tony Jackson. He was arrested in 1997. After a routine traffic stop, police found in his car the tools of his trade. So they've got the thing, right, where they call it the rape kit. He's got the rope. He's got handcuffs. He's got a gun. He's got duct tape. Evidently, with all of his victims, there was some element of stalking. The background investigation put him in Mason County at the same time that Jodi disappeared. In fact, it's Mason City. Not only did it put him in Mason City, but it put him living 2 blocks from her TV station that she worked at and less than 1 mile from her apartment. Mm. Okay? Mm-hmm. So let's see here. I'll give you a little glimpse of this jewel named Tony Jackson because he's a winner. Here's Tony. What you doing, buddy? So there's Tony Jackson. Again, I do put these pictures on Andrea up late, so you'll be able to see them on Instagram here in the next couple of days. So this investigative reporter, Caroline Lowe, was covering Tony Jackson's case, right? So that's what got her eyes on Jodi's case. So let's see here. So evidently, Tony was once a promising college basketball player at Iowa's Waldorf College. He says that he's 6'5". I'm not sure if he's quite 6'5", but he's a big dude. And they say that the problem is he would do really well and then he would snap. So this was even happening as early on as in college. Mm. And he would get into violent episodes with people and he was kicked out of college because of this. Okay. So he was kicked off the team. He was playing college ball. And because of his violent episodes, he got kicked out. So then 1.5 years before Jodi disappeared, get this, he enrolled at North Iowa Community College in Mason City, where he showed an interest in broadcasting. It is interesting how for a little while, I think John Van Sice starts to kind of diminish in our head here for a little bit as I talk about Tony. So obviously we know that we're going to talk about it, but his victims, like I said, tended to have some element of stalking with it. So it is not far-fetched at all to think that if he has an interest in broadcasting and he lives in the city where Jodi was a news anchor, he's very likely watching the local news. He's, the local people and tools of the trade, and that would not be crazy. So the theories that Jackson might have watched Jodi on TV actually started to know her schedule, right? She comes in and does the same 2 shows every day, the morning and the noon show, right? And could even potentially have stalked her. Remember, we talked about the phone book. So her name, address, and phone number are all public knowledge. Something else that was troubling, however, about Tony Jackson. So this would come from his ex-girlfriend. And she spoke to the news outlet WCCO in 1998. And she said, quote, "When he snapped, he snapped." There was another ex-girlfriend of Tony Jackson's who said they broke up 5 days before Jodi vanished. Okay. This ex-girlfriend says, quote, "And it was violent, very violent. I mean, it was a totally different person. It was like the devil stepped inside of him and just took over." That was what his ex-girlfriend said about the tendencies that Tony Jackson would have. So as I'm talking to you about what all his ex-girlfriends said, I'm going to put up a picture for you now. On the left is that girlfriend, that ex-girlfriend of Tony Jackson's that broke up with him because of his violence. Just days before Jodi disappeared. And the picture on the right is actually a picture of Jodi. So it's kind of interesting.
I thought earlier when you were pulling photos, I thought that was the same photo. I thought maybe that was.
Like when you saw this earlier?
Yeah, I thought that was like a DMV photo.
Oh,
or
gotcha.
Something to the left.
Well, because it could be. So if you're just listening, the reason the reaction is this way is because the pictures are just incredibly similar.
Very, very similar.
Both women are young, white females with bob length, just above length, blonde hair, even kind of the same color lipstick in these photos. So just very important to know. Here's another picture of Tony on the left, and that is Jodi on the right. So when I saw that, it kind of blew my mind. If what her account was already wasn't horrible enough, then to see that photo. So the woman did get back together briefly with Tony Jackson until she says his anger took another very scary turn. He then tried to choke her. And that's when she finally called it quits. So he was taken into custody. He was arrested for the attack, but the charges were ultimately dropped, sadly, when the woman moved away and declined to proceed. 4 months later, he's going to go on to commit what they consider the Minnesota rapes. Okay. We talk often about domestic violence, and, again, it's every show, but be it sexual crimes, physical violent crimes, whatever you want to look at, a lot of things do escalate. Not everything does. But when you get to domestic violence, that already he was having violent tendencies in college, then he's getting into these screaming matches with the girlfriends, then that's escalating to where she said it was just kind of like a different person took over. And then now we're getting into choking. Would you say in your experience that once we get into hands-on manual strangulation, that doesn't get better?
Yeah, it's just a matter of time.
Yeah.
Sadly for victims, because a lot of times people don't want to walk away, or they see the good in people and then they go, well, 6 months of greatness, and then all of a sudden he just snaps. But yes, it only escalates.
Yeah. So that's what happened there. So I just told you about the Minnesota rape. So on May 4th, 1997, this is going to be what gets Tony locked up, but this will be the last of this spree that I'm going to tell you about. So on May 4th, 1997, Tony Jackson sexually assaulted an 18-year-old woman in Washington County. She had let him into her home to use the phone. He had knocked on the door to ask to use the phone. Once in, he he takes control of her. He threatens to kill her. He handcuffs her behind her back. He proceeds to rape her multiple times. A jury did convict him of first-degree criminal sexual assault, burglary, second-degree assault, and false imprisonment. But that was in May of 97, but starting in February of 97, okay? So just shy of 3 months prior, until that May assault, he actually had raped 6 women that we know of. 4 of them were in the span of 2 weeks. These all kind of had the element of stalking. And without getting in the weeds of this right now, because there are multiple accounts, right? So I'm not going to go through the 6 accounts, but there were some where, like, for instance, a woman had stayed at a friend's house at some point and thought she saw someone sleeping on the couch when she got up to go, like, to the restroom or whatever. And it was like a black male that later fits Tony's description. But at the time, she didn't know if this was not just another friend or whatever. She didn't think much about it. Like, he had, like, inserted himself upon the home. Another time, another one of his victims had kind of come to a stoplight. He comes to the car, bangs on the window, essentially carjacks, right? So gets her to scoot over, gets the car to a different location where he assaulted her. With the particular carjacking one, again, we've got someone in a car, right? But with that one, he actually was including the element of strangulation to her passing out and then waking back up. And so one of the times the victim reported that he actually, when she woke up and looked at him, he said, "Oh, I thought I'd killed you." And we don't know how he said it, like, God, I thought I'd killed you, or I'm happy about it, or whatever. So he had, like, insanely violent tendencies along with already the violence of rape. So, and again, he lived 2 blocks from the TV station that Jodi worked at and less than 1 mile from her home during the time she disappeared. Had just broken up with Jodi's doppelganger days before Jodi's disappearance. So keep in mind that on Monday, June 26, 1995, this is one day before Jodi's disappearance. She disappeared in the wee morning hours of that Tuesday, right? The day before, Tony Jackson bought a car. He had this car for 2 weeks until the check that he'd used for it bounced. This is how things used to be, guys. And he returned that car. But in those 2 weeks, he had put 550 miles on this car. And remember when I told you that everything in town was really close to each other, okay?
Yeah.
He also this car matched the description of a car that had been seen in the area. So it's just interesting. The day before she goes missing, he buys himself a new car that he can't pay for, puts 550 miles on it in 2 weeks, and then returns the car. So Tony Jackson was sentenced to the equivalent of life in prison. Still, that Caroline Lowe that I mentioned, the investigative reporter, kind of kept digging into any connection potentially with Jodi's case. She'll say that when she went to the Mason City Police Department to kind of inquire about any correlation with Tony Jackson, that it was as though they were dusting off, like dust off of his file, essentially. Like, there didn't seem to be a big concern with Tony Jackson, but not because he'd, like, been cleared in any kind of way or was alibied or anything like that, okay? So there was a former jail mate that Tony Jackson had spent time with. This guy was in there for just, I think, like, multiple, like, DUIs and different things like this, like traffic stuff, not violent stuff. And he was getting out. This might have been when Tony was holding or whatever, but they had time together in the cell, okay? And, we're not giant fans of jail confessions, but that's not what this is. This guy was actually out. He was out in public, not locked up when he says that this stuff took place. He had nothing to gain from this. He wasn't bartering time here, okay? And he says that Tony Jackson told him, "I abducted an Anchorwoman and killed her." The man said that Jackson boasted about what he'd done in a rap song. Now, look, this sounds silly.
Go ahead.
Well, you know a little bit about this, don't you?
Yeah.
Somebody else that did this. So this man, the jail mate to Tony Jackson, actually wrote down the lyrics because he didn't want to forget them. So the lyrics are, he said, "She's a stiffin," like a stiff one, right? Like a stiffin around tiffin in a pilage of silage in a by low below. Okay.
Mhm.
So thinking that this might mean Jodi was buried in or near a farm, near a silo, there was the town of Tiffin. I
Okay.
feel like 100, 150 miles away, something like that.
Mhm.
Remember, he did put 550 miles on a car in the span of
Mhm.
2 weeks. A few hours from Mason City, this investigative reporter went there, and she was able to bring law enforcement with her with cadaver dogs to search for human remains. So she says that 2 of the 3 dogs alerted, which is a sign that something had been
Mhm.
there. Now, remember, the dogs don't alert to animal cadavers, best in my knowledge, right? Because they are
Okay,
I think they are much more specifically trained to human decomposition, which is different than animal decomposition.
Mhm.
So this alerts that something had been there, and the boards that they found there evidently were sent to the state crime lab, but just like so many other things in Jodi's case, it didn't seem to tie Tony Jackson. You know, he can circumstantially spit a rap,
Mhm.
and you can have 2 out of 3 cadaver dogs that hit on something. This, in my mind, he's not ruled out right now.
Oh.
I think there's a whole lot more to look into here, but that was kind of it. So on May 5th of 1999, the Mason City Police issued the following statement. Quote, after conducting a thorough investigation, which included interviews, crime analysis, records review, and polygraph examinations, Tony Jackson is not considered at this time a viable suspect in the investigation.
Okay.
Would you like me to tell you what those bullet points were again?
Yeah.
Interviews,
Mhm.
where Tony Jackson says he just didn't do it.
Okay.
By the way. Crime analysis. I don't think anything discounted him. They just couldn't get him tied to right there, right? Records review. I'm not sure exactly. Okay. And polygraph examination. That's when they say that he was not considered at that time a viable suspect. And they actually, for all intents and purposes, really just didn't look into him being a lead anymore at this point. I mean, as of like to now. That we know of, I should say that we know of, but they did come out to make that presser, like to make the statement that he is not considered. They didn't have to say that, right? So it makes it sound like we're not following up on him. I don't know why they would need to like dupe him on this. He's already sitting in prison for the rest of his life for these other rapes. So I'm not going to read this to you right now because I have pages and pages where I took screenshots from this crazy article where there was this pastor who basically says that someone came to him saying that they wanted to speak. They could not go to law enforcement because it involves law enforcement. And they go on. This actually, unfortunately, what the informant says, there's not evidence because some things don't have evidence, right? Like sometimes so what happens is later when people hear it, they discount it quickly and say, there's no evidence of that. Well, okay. There won't always be, I think, sometimes, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So this informant says something kind of implicates 1 to 2 of the members of the Mason City Police Department. This sets in motion a string of events that takes place over years to the point that this pastor is like, what do I do? You know, like, do I call the station? And so he calls his sister-in-law, who is a police officer, to say, what do I do? And she says, immediately, she says, you need to call the station. You need to go through the proper channels so that it maintains the integrity of the case. Let them work this informant and see what this looks like. So he does. And nothing happens. And then he follows up and they won't take his calls. And then he follows up again and nothing. And then he asks for like essentially like their statement, like the cops like supplement or their whatever from when they kind of followed up. And there was no record kept of his report of this informant. Okay. So copy and paste that over the next many years. This happens more and more and more to the point that he's getting more information. He keeps coming to them. Finally, he calls like the city council, the mayor's office. Like he starts to go outside of the police department because he's like, look, this may be nothing, but also like, why is there continues to be no record of any of it? And sometimes he'll talk to them. I think he was hung up on twice when they're like, you got nothing. People say things all the time. I understand that. But ultimately what happens is that there's a conversation between his sister-in-law, who was a police officer, and this other officer kind of implicated by the informant. And she had it on body cam. And she went, I guess, against policy in recording it
Okay.
And so they use that to fire her. And now they won't take any more statements from her. But it was her conversation with the officer that was kind of implicated by that informant. And there's so much more. We obviously, you guys, this case is 30 years old. Like, we could do a 20-part series on this. So that's why I'm kind of not talking to you for an hour about Tony Jackson and an hour about this. But this isn't interesting. We don't, conspiracies are difficult. Cover-ups are difficult to happen. They don't often happen. This is an interesting tidbit. And it kind of has legs in the sense that whether or not that officer did anything, there are kind of multiple different, like, independent people that have come forward to say kind of different things that involve this same idea, like at different times over the years. So, and I don't mean just people like in a Reddit hole speculating. These are people who are kind of coming forward to say at this time on this date, X, Y, Z. Okay. So that's something to know. So in 2008, all right, you guys, we're getting current. Okay. We're getting there. I promise we're actually to that. We've only got a couple more of my pages. We've gone through like 14 of them.
Maureen said you can talk all night. Just keep going.
His shift must be started.
She said stream all night.
So in 2008, okay, we're up to 2008. Something new took place. Law enforcement has followed thousands of leads at this point, right? Of course, this had become like a really big national case. They talk about, quote, we like to keep the integrity of the investigation as pristine as possible. And this was Jeff Jacobson, who was a special agent with the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation, who winds up they start to take over that other guy's, the preacher I was just talking about. They kind of talk some of that. So get this. You ready? The Mason City Globe Gazette, so a local newspaper there in Mason City, 2008. Remember, Jodi went missing in 1995. They received a journal in a large envelope that had no return address, but it did have a June 4th postmark from Waterloo. Okay, so in 2008, they get a journal in an envelope with no return address. So police, DCI officials, they all say they don't think that the document was leaked by their employees. They are conducting an investigation to determine where it came from. Again, that was back in 2008. But representatives of both agencies confirmed that the document was a reproduction of a journal they took into evidence after searching Jodi's apartment the days following her abduction. So the journal that was mailed without a return address to the Gazette was a copy of Jodi's, I believe it's a 68-page journal. So this isn't like a tiny leaflet. So they say at that time, we're confident that it didn't come from Iowa DCI case files or case files from the Mason City Police Department. He said that copies in the case files have specific markings that are not appearing in the copies sent to the newspaper. Authorities said that several agencies have worked on the case, but only 3 of them, the local police department, the DCI, and the FBI, had copies of that journal.
Okay.
They say it was quote, it was unlawfully released. DCI agent Chris Calloway said. He said that that in itself is part of the investigation right now. Would you like to know where this journal came from? Because we do find out eventually. At that time, they didn't know. And remember, it's a huge investigation. It's unlawfully leaked. It wasn't a part of our stuff. We don't know who got it and how they got it and why they got it and why it came to the Gazette. Okay. Ultimately, it was determined at that time. So the person who had been the chief of police during and through Jodi's investigation up until his resignation in 2006, okay, police chief, I want to make sure I'm saying his name right, David Ellingson, okay, the Mason City Police Chief, David Ellingson, he resigned in 2006. In 2008, this journal gets mailed by his wife to the Gazette. The former police chief's wife mails this anonymously to the newspaper.
So the first question I would wonder is, why wouldn't, well, one, hold on, were they divorced?
No.
All right. Well,
I think so. Okay. That's kind of like a startling piece of information. And as I've kind of chewed through it a little bit, in my brain, and it could be a back play in the sense of, for some reason he wanted it mailed in. For some reason he wanted it. Maybe he leaked it. I'm not saying that he did, but I'm saying because I've this whole time thought, why did his wife? I still wonder, why did she do that? Is she throwing him under the bus? Why does she want Jodi's? How does it behoove her for Jodi's journal to? Also, let's step it back. Why did she have it? Why was it at their house?
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. If he had it, and there was 3 copies of that journal made for those 3 agencies, right?
Mm-hmm.
He has to explain.
DCI, FBI, and Mason City.
He has to explain why he would have had an extra
because
copy.
He likely inadvertently brought it home when he cleaned out his desk when he resigned.
Okay. So then at some
point...
But
they said here, it says, we are confident that it didn't come from Iowa DCI case files or case files from the Mason City Police Department. He said that copies in the case files have specific markings not appearing in the copy that was sent to the newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
Did he make his own copy?
That's what it sounds like. Someone did, but it sounds like a 4th copy was made.
So.
Yeah. Now, if you're saying he cleared his desk out and it just happened to get in his belongings, the only other possible way is if
he didn't leave in a fire.
Well, no.
He knew he was leaving. You'd think he's kind of going through his...
if he was lead on a case.
Okay.
And had that, but it was an additional copy.
Okay.
That maybe he was using for a briefing or something
constantly
like that.
Referencing.
Yeah. And
it's got the cipher from the Zodiac in it. Yeah.
Exactly. And the original is either an evidence or a copy of the original as an evidence or whatever. But if he's not lead on the case, if he's not involved in the case, he shouldn't.
It's also bad practice, though, right? Can you just make your own copies? Are those not accounted for?
Well, you can do things like that. Like I said, if it's for a brief, this is a personal journal, 68 pages. That's not usually going to be something you're going to be giving any kind of briefing on. I'm saying more like a copy of, say, a photograph of something or writings or something or a suicide note.
Not to interrupt you, just kind of, I think, a different perspective. So Brett is saying that smallish town police chief might have wanted copies and updates for himself.
Mm-hmm.
Potentially, yeah. But it's just odd. It's odd that his wife mailed the thing in. Again, was that really the play? Did he have it mailed in by her? We don't know. But ultimately, get this. So he had a deposition in 2010. And he said, basically, his story in his deposition was I don't know, essentially what the fuss is about. My wife is not law enforcement. She's not bound by the same rules we are. But it's still, okay, I say this. As far as we know, as lowly citizens, it's never been, there's never been an explanation as to why. So even in that deposition, he's like, well, I don't she is not. So, so that was 2008. So through the course of a few years leading up to 2010 or 12 was that whole weird stuff where the preacher was calling in, talking about this informant who was implicating police officers until his sister-in-law, who was a police officer unrelated to the implication, was actually fired because I think she was trying to look into that more. Then in 2008 was this whole journal weirdness. So get this, on January 1st, 2020. So we're all the way up to 2020, guys. A local billboard there put up by the FindJodi.com organization was vandalized. So they actually sponsored and put up multiple billboards around town. This particular billboard originally read, quote, "Someone knows something. Is it you?" with the word "you" in all capital letters. But the spray paint graffiti then read 2 things. It read Frank Stearns and Machine Shed. Those were the 2 things painted on the billboard, and here's a photo of it. So it's a little blurry here, but you can see there's a photo of Jodi, and it says, "Someone knows something. Is it you? Frank Stearns, Machine Shed." Best I can gather, there is a bar or something called the Machine Shed 100 miles or so outside of town, or it's not referencing that at all. We don't really know. Frank Stearns, though, in case you were wondering, was the original lead on the case.
Okay.
And this was in 2020,
Mm-hmm.
as recently as then, as that billboard was defaced.
Okay.
Okay. So these are all good things to know. In 2019, let's go back to our good friend John Van Cise. Remember the one who just cared so deeply for Jodi. Boatman. He was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 2019. Ultimately, when police potentially had questions for him, even after that, his condition mentally deteriorated quickly enough that he was no longer really considered like a viable source at that point. But in 2017, an interesting decision happened from investigators. So 2 years prior to his Alzheimer's diagnosis, and we are going to wrap it up, you guys. I know we've been going long. So I'm going to read to you from, I believe, this source. This is not my handwritten note, so I want to make sure that I reference it properly. This is from the findjodi.com website. And so it says a senior judge in Gordo County has ruled to partially unseal. You guys, this is kind of interesting. And Brian, I've been talking about it because I didn't even consider this to be something, I don't know, that would happen in a case this many years later. To partially unseal a 2017 search warrant connected to the unsolved disappearance of Jodi. I'll kind of paraphrase a little bit while it keeps the supporting affidavit under seal. So get this. There was a motion filed by these attorneys, the defense attorneys of John Van Cise's, that he just kind of had on retainer related to GPS tracking devices that were placed on 2 vehicles tied to John Van Cise. Okay. He was considered still a person of interest at the time these GPS trackers were put on his car. So evidently, John moved to Arizona years after Jodi went missing. Okay. But then in February of 2017, so she goes missing in 1995. So 23 years later, in 2007, no. Is that right? Am I doing my math right? I never can do math fast on the show.
You know you're asking the wrong one.
Yeah, like 22 years later. In February of 2017, investigators with the Mason City Police Department obtained court approval to place GPS tracking devices on the 2 vehicles as John Van Cise prepared to travel from Arizona to Iowa. The warrant was approved and executed. So at the state's request, the entire file was sealed shortly thereafter and has remained confidential to the tune that every year they go through the motions to, quote, reseal that search warrant affidavit for the GPS trackers for his car. So to paraphrase, guys, John Van Cise has been doing his thing. Time has gone by. 20-something years go by with not really a peep in the case. And John decides to travel from where he had moved in Arizona back to Iowa. We don't know what for necessarily, but the cops had been keeping such a close tab on him for over 2 decades that when they got wind that he was traveling to Iowa, they execute a search warrant, because you have to have one. You can't just track someone's car, to put these trackers on his 2 vehicles. The 2 vehicles were not even suspected to be involved in anything to do with Jodi in the sense that they were newer model vehicles. They weren't even in existence when Jodi went missing. However, they did want to see where he was going in Iowa and what he was doing. We don't have the affidavit for those search warrants. It's going to take, so get this, this all just happened like within the past few weeks that John Van Cise's defense team moved to unseal the search warrant for the tracking devices. Okay. And they did so by saying, we talked about this. It's kind of weird, but they said that they wanted to unseal them because they want to give John Van Cise's family just like basically peace of mind that he didn't do this. And I'm thinking, if they thought he didn't do it, they wouldn't be tracking his vehicles 20 something years after her disappearance, or if they didn't have some inkling or something to think of. And, you've spoken on this, they have to have PC. So they have to have enough probable cause to articulate why they find it necessary to track his vehicles as he makes the move to Iowa. So the best that anybody can really assess here is that, potentially they were looking for a dumping spot, a grave, something that he would have gone to visit in those vehicles. But that's crazy. That's crazy to me. So Judge James M. Drew denied the motion to unseal the warrants supporting affidavit submitted by by the police investigator. Prochaska is his last name. So they say that the rest of the warrant documents, including the application, endorsement, and search warrant itself, can be made public. This takes, I think, around 30 days. Would that be about right in your brain? That's what I was reading, but I don't know.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The court found that the Prochaska affidavit actually contains sensitive investigative details, including specific time. See, so this whole time that we've been talking, when I say we as citizens don't know this information, investigators do, or at least we hope this is, stuff that they have. The affidavit contains specific times, scene observations, and items discovered that are known only to law enforcement and the perpetrator. So releasing this information could compromise the integrity of the investigation and diminish the corroborative value of any future confession. Okay, what that means, then somebody can call in with a false confession because they know details now that no one else knew, right? So that's why they don't want to unseal that portion. However, the judge did grant to unseal the actual search warrant or the application and endorsement of the search warrant, which is basically going to say we put these trackers on his cars.
Mm-hmm.
And like we talked about, the defense is probably going after this now because, unfortunately, in terms of for an investigation standpoint, John Van Cise has died. He actually died this past December, just a few months ago, of 2024 of natural causes. Okay, so John Van Cise died then. He was never cleared as a suspect. In fact, last we see, they were still tracking him and keeping search warrants sealed on his name. Others are still trying to find leads involving potentially a lead or a association with Tony Jackson, the serial rapist that we discussed. And I think the more we lean into either one of them can sound very suspect.
Mm-hmm. That Tony Jackson one's
tough.
That is a tough.
It could really turn around to be that, John Van Cise is just this arrogant, controlling.
Mm-hmm.
I want her as mine. I like the younger ladies. And then we go back to the fact that they were still keeping tabs on him. But there were complaints of tunnel vision in this case. In and amongst even some of the investigators that were part of Mason City Police Department that are now retired have come back to say, I'm not sure why all the eyes have always been on John Van Cise. Kind of, mild complaints that Tony Jackson wasn't looked into more at the time. And that's from some people who actually had worked the case. So here's a couple more pictures. This is Tony Van Cise actually here. That's with another friend of Jodi's. They're talking at his boat dock to, I believe that was either to 48 Hours or a Current Affair, one of the stations that came to talk to him. Here's a picture from inside Jodi's apartment. There's Jodi waving in the backseat of a car. Look at that.
That's Craig T. Nelson.
It sure is.
Wow.
She actually was hanging out with Tim Allen the weekend before her disappearance as well.
Really?
That like golf tournament thing. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. And I forget who else. There were a handful of names actually. And there she is with her golf clubs. Here she is at that surprise birthday party that John threw, and that is him towering over them there. Here's little Jodi. And if you're just listening again, I'll put these pictures up for you. Here is her shoe outside of her driver's side door at the scene there. And there's John. What's up, John? Oof. So I have not had even a minute to really look at the comments, but
half mine aren't going through for some reason when I'm sending them.
Oh yeah. But what do you think? Are you thinking more the Tony Jackson side of things, that rapist guy? That's a tough one.
Yeah, he has all the behavior indicators and is within a mile or two in a smaller area. I mean, that's the thing. Like,
what we don't have from John is other violent behavior, right? So I think the best draw to connect John motive-wise would be his jealousy. There was talk of her that in the 10 days prior to her death, she had met a new guy that her other friends didn't really know that well. He's been interviewed. He's been cleared. He's fine. He kind of remains anonymous. Her friends didn't really know him. She was keeping him a little quiet. And that's the thing too. We can't forget this in investigations. People have their own lives. People don't tell their friends everything. I'm not saying she was, but she could have had a relationship with John and her other friends not known it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I only don't think so because I think he would have made it known. But
he hinted around, like he hinted.
He did.
My clothes
but when
will be
her
in there, or
yes,
this,
but
or
when
that.
her friends would ask her, she would scoff it off and say absolutely not. Not that she couldn't just tell them whatever.
Yeah.
But she would always say he's like a dad to me. He's like a dad to me.
Mm-hmm.
I think that with him, I think really if we're looking at him doing this, which there are a lot of things that I get it, like the bizarre phone calls, the timelines that are kind of weird, his nature of behavior with her, the kind of obsession, the fixation with her, which those are like some adjectives used to describe his feelings toward Jodi from friends of hers that felt uneasy around him. So there are some things, and potentially jealousy, right? So if he finds out there was another guy, maybe she just rebuffs him the night before when they're watching the videotape, or that morning she's running out to work. Jodi, let me talk to you. She's just put the key in the car. We've talked about this. I'm not interested, whatever. And without even meaning to, he snaps. We've seen this kind of thing happen. Now you're looking at someone who doesn't have violent tendencies, who doesn't have a criminal history like that, who snaps and then still has to dispose of a body, keep it quiet, keep it hidden. And that would be a little bit more difficult, but not unheard of. Police clearly seem to think he was good for it because they kept an eye on him this whole time. But when you look at Tony Jackson, I mean, he absolutely had all the tendencies. He had been doing this. He had been escalating in violence along with his rapes. He was carjacking. He was assaulting and strangling women in their cars, in their homes, handcuffing them. He carried duct tape. He would often put duct tape around their eyes to blindfold them, and handcuff them behind their back. He was, the manual strangulation into the point of suffocation. So,
yeah.
And that was only escalating. And he had this whole interest in broadcasting and, all of the things. So, do you want to tell them a little bit about what you know about raps?
Oh, I can't
in relation to murder.
Did we talk about it?
You and I talked about it. I'm not sure that we did.
Okay.
On the show.
Yeah, I mean we have had that before, where a guy actually committed a murder, tried to conceal it through dismemberment, and he and his new girlfriend. And he had killed his ex-wife, the mother of his child, and recorded a rap song about it. And then during the trial, prosecutors played the rap song.
We'll have to pull it up for the next show.
Yeah. So actually, the prosecutors, when they first heard about the rap song, one of the first things was kind of like, well, how do we know it's him for sure that did this rap song? And then when they heard it and played it in court too, at the very end, he uses his government name, his real name, at the end of the song, like the end of the track. That's how he signs off. To the point where during the trial, he was kind of quoted in the newspapers or whatever from one of the corrections officers. He asked the officer, basically, what'd you think about them bars or whatever, something to that effect, because they played his song in court. He was on trial for murder. So, yes, people can, gang members do it all the time, but
he danced to it.
Yeah. Yeah, he was wiggling
as they
and
were
moving,
playing it. He sat back and kind of grinned and was like,
"It's horrible.
Move into the song."
It's horrible. A book has been written about the case, documentaries. Yeah, it's horrible. But going back to that, the Tony Jackson guy and writing that rap, there could be an explanation for that, and I'm not necessarily going to say it, but it doesn't really matter.
Say what?
Because people will fantasize about things and write a song.
Oh, yeah.
And they can write it very accurate and even pretend like they're dumping a body or whatever.
And then if they take cadaver dogs out there and they get nothing, they get nothing. But they got a hit.
Yeah. And it's like we talked about. It's like all these little indicators, it's often like as you're looking at it and you're going, man, at every turn, this guy seems to be more active. It'd be interesting to know why they publicly said, hey, he's basically cleared. That has to be, in my opinion, that would have to be rock solid. I don't know of any time
the way you operate. I'm not sure from everything I've gathered.
I know, and
I've not found that's
learned,
the case in this.
I have learned, these cases, and when we talk, I sound very naive because I'm sure people hear this and go, this dude's crazy. And then they start thinking of cases, or you'll bring them up and go, no, there's cases of this going on and sloppy police work. Or we know there have been officers before that have been involved in rapes and murders and stuff. So
and not the norm. But the problem is
Right.
we cover a lot of old unsolved cases, and there sometimes becomes a fine line between lack of experience, just ineptitude to gross negligence, right? And then corruption. Like there's kind of like a
Yeah.
spectrum of like which one is it. And sometimes it's like a mistake made that
Yeah.
an ego gets in the way of, or pride, and then you can't admit the mistake. So then you almost have to be corrupt to cover it up and keep it that way. And it does happen. It doesn't happen that often, but the cases that we cover are such that it can get a little sideways sometimes.
Yeah, and I think sometimes, I don't know about this one, but police leaders or sheriffs sometimes will get in front of the camera and say stuff because they're getting pressure from
for sure,
from the family of someone saying, hey, you're harassing my son or you're harassing my daughter or whatever. Yeah, the news keeps saying that they're guilty and all
or the
that.
chief saying, hey, it's a bad look.
Yeah.
You know, but I really don't. I don't know why. I don't know. I don't know why Tony wasn't looked into more. But here's the deal: it's happening now, not necessarily by Mason City, but by all the other people who have been, who been pulling for the FOIAs, which you can only get so much right now. Obviously, it's still unsolved. But man, I think there could be a way potentially. And that's why I was asking you to call that police department. I want to know what types of prints they took, because clearly he's incarcerated now. So his stuff's in the system. They didn't have DNA in the terms of like, oh, let me tell you another thing. Now I'd love to, the car that he bought, that he returned in 2 weeks, that potentially if he had something to do with this, she would have been in that car, right?
Yeah.
He returned it 2 weeks later. Of course, it wasn't processed because it wasn't part of anything at the time, right? It's gone through multiple owners. It has been tracked down, but at this point, it's been 30 years, right? So, but Michelle's own car, excuse me, I knew I was going to do that. Jodi's own car, the Miata, was actually, we have a picture of it being towed. It was towed away. They did some initial processing, mainly the outside of the car. I've not read or heard any word of them processing any of the carpets, the fibers, the whatever. And I think it was looked at as this took place right outside the car, which is probably true. Her door was probably not open. In fact, I've not read yet whether to see if her door was locked or not. So I don't know if she was successful in unlocking it when that key got bent, if in fact that's when the key got bent, right? So maybe it was locked and they, and I was like, okay, nothing happened here. But either way, the car was processed externally and then given to Jodi's mom. And in fact, the police did keep the key as evidence. So a girlfriend's mother drove Jodi's car to Jodi's mother for her to keep it, but they had to like kind of wire it up or start it, like wired it up, I guess, because they kept the key, and she just kind of had to drive it straight through to get there. And then it's gone through, I think, 3 to 5 owners at this point. The latest being a male who has it. He knows the history of it. Evidently, he's like a big guy, like a 6'4" guy, drive around this Miata, but it's only got like 50-something thousand miles on it. But that was it. I mean,
did you say anything about those beer cans that they did fingerprint them?
We don't know.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know things like,
there's all those things that we can't, we're just not going to know right now.
Yeah.
I did, if you've listened, and I'm not going to get into it, but I did accidentally say Michelle a couple of times. It's because Michelle Martinko, which we've covered multiple times, who was sadly murdered in 1979, 18-year-old girl in her car in the mall in Cedar Rapids.
Damn it.
Bless you. Take a drink.
God. Sorry.
Night Shift brought to you by Claritin. So Michelle Martinko, long story short, she and Jodi Huisentruit actually look very, very similar physically. We have crimes in or near cars, XYZ. These were, 16 years difference in time. Michelle Martinko's being 1979 with Jodi's being in 1995. So briefly, there was kind of looking into Jerry Burns, who is the murderer of Michelle Martinko, just to see what he was doing at that time. Was he in or near Mason City? So Mason City, we've covered Monticello, and then Cedar Rapids, all in Iowa there, are all within just over 100 miles of each other. So it would be fair to say that that's a possibility. But the lead, Matt Dillinger, on Michelle Martinko, said that there's no reason to believe that while Jerry likely has other victims, they don't have any reason to believe that Jodi was one of them. So if you did hear me mistake Jodi's name for Michelle occasionally, that's because that's fine.
And let me clarify too, for people later in the chats, there's a term called Jodi in the military.
Oh yeah.
There were comments about that. Yes.
Not referencing the victim in this. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that just dawned on me. I had no clue, because that's, yeah. I was like,
Jodi is if like there's is a female, if their husband is deployed, that commits adultery on the male. Or is it, wait, is it the female that's deployed?
Jodi is the rascal that shows up and has an affair with the deployed soldier.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So like, all the cadences were always about Jodi's got your girl and gone.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah, so sorry, that was like side check going. I didn't even think about that. I just saw that they had put Jodi up there, but yeah, something completely different. And Jodi's were the worst. Horrible.
That's what I hear.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have anything?
I don't.
We've now come to the point of the show where I can breathe and then not talk because my throat's sore.
I thought I was going to tell a story at the end, and now I can't remember what it was.
You told the story about the dismembering rapper?
Yeah, that's terrible.
Yeah, I don't know. Did you have something else?
I don't think. Totally wet sprocket.
Totally wet sprocket.
For the record, I only remember that band having like one song. I don't think they were that good. Were they? Toad the Wet Sprocket. It's kind of like a.
I don't know. I can only think of Totally Wet Sprocket now. Like I don't. And that's funny.
It was funny. Like when Abe first started talking, I can't remember if they were like a local band from where he was from. I can't remember why or how he got onto them.
It's fine.
Or maybe he was just telling me about them. I don't know. I was just a little kid. What did I know?
What do you know? I think that's about all we got. Let's see. Did I save any fun photos on here to show y'all? No. Man. I was hoping I had a good little Dennis Rader playing dress up to throw on here for you.
Ugh,
that's your favorite.
Please don't do that.
All right, guys. Well, if y'all don't have any questions, do you guys have any thoughts on this case? Are you team, maybe I'll put that on Instagram story. Are you team John Van Cise or Tony Jackson as perpetrator? If you had to right now.
Oh, I mean, you would have to prove to me that Tony Jackson had a lock solid alibi. Only because of all the behavior, the area, the.
Oh, I forgot to tell you. His alibi was not one.
Okay.
He actually has, I think, 10 missing hours in the time like leading up to and after her. 10 or 12 missing hours.
Yeah.
That he can't account for. Or that's never been accounted for surrounding. So Tony, interesting thing about Tony as well, when he was leaving court after his sentencing for the string of murders that he committed in Minneapolis, they gave him a moment to speak. And he says he's talking about himself kind of in third person. And he's saying things like, first of all, when he was interviewed in prison, he says, you can see his rage start to come out. He's kind of doing this thing where he's like, yeah, what's up? Like, no. And he's acting like kind of cool. And he's getting pissed at this reporter. And the reporter said, what would you like to talk to me about? Jodi Huisentruit. And he said, do you have anything? Did you, whatever. Like, there are whispers, there are allegations. Her or somebody's roommate said this and that. And when they're talking about like his different stuff that he committed, he said, what do you mean somebody said that? And he said, whoever had said that he did whatever the thing, he says, is she still living? And they say, yeah. And he said, why'd she say that? And he said, why's she still living if she said that? And he says 3 or 4 times, why's she still living if she said that? So the reporter said, so you didn't do that? He said, I'm saying, why is she still living if she said that I did that? And this was actually not dealing with Jodi. It was dealing with a different one of his rape allegations. Mm-hmm. And so then the reporter says, are you saying that you would kill her for like snitching? Mm-hmm. He said, no, quit putting words on my mouth. Yeah. I didn't say that. I said, why is she still living if she said that? Oh, but so there's that. But then when he's leaving court and he has time to like have his own, say whatever he's going to say, he says, yeah, why? And then you're what? You're not going to let him back out on the streets, referring to himself, so he can rape again and do all these things you said. Again, he's not going to get out on the streets, so he can rape and kill again. I was like,
yeah,
exactly. Like, so, and of course, I mean, that's him sentencing, going to prison. So it's like, that's nothing that's ever like followed up on in that sense. But it's just kind of, I've never killed somebody, so I'm not going to accidentally say that I killed somebody.
Yeah. Yeah. Unless someone openly accused you of killing, then you might say, you don't let the bad guy out because he didn't kill. But he was never.
But that was before.
Right. Mm-hmm. So all those small things, that's what I mean about like, like we talk about, you just like the little red flags or the tick marks or checks, or you're like, okay, he's got a whole lot of going on. John the Boatman did as well, but also you've got a guy
who for sure is doing these things.
Mm-hmm. In very close proximity. So I mean, obviously in that investigation, you're looking at both equally, but when you're asking me like, which way am I going right now? I'm like, you've already got somebody with a very violent history. And now you're telling me he's got 10 hours that he can't account for.
10 or 12. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's going to be one of those. That's tough. Mm-hmm. Now, you would go out there obviously with like ground penetrating radar and stuff. And cause you're probably dealing with a large area out in Tiffin or wherever it's called.
Yeah, out by like this farm and like a silo or something. Like it's a whole big whatever.
Yeah.
But I mean, to think about pinpointing an area that far out, that far away, like that's interesting.
Yeah. It makes you wonder too, whatever his connects were out there. Like,
Tiffin?
Like, yeah. Why he was out, like why he would reference that, why he would
know to go there to dispose.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, and he had been, okay, hey, you locals in that area, would Tiffin be anywhere between like Minneapolis and then like a Mason City or those other parts of Iowa there? Because that's where he had originally, because he was actually, real quick before we wrap up, but now I want to double check this, because he was, oh my gosh, he was in school. Here we go. Okay, he went to school at Waldorf College. You guys, where's that in Iowa? They're saying Minneapolis, south to Tiffin on 218. Mason City would be slightly west. Did you read Safa King? Is that what's making you laugh? Did you just laugh?
No. No, someone made a comment earlier and I did giggle. I can't remember who said it now. It was something about he sounds like he wants to be the king of the cracker factory or something. I have no idea. It just cracked me up the way it was mentioned. I don't know.
Okay.
Sounds like one of those colloquial sayings or something.
Mm-hmm. It does. Mayor of Correctionville. Okay, Waldorf is in Forest City, which is also north central Iowa. Okay. Well, either way, like that's why I was kind of trying to reference, like when he lived in Minneapolis or going back and forth, did he have any reason to be going through Tiffin?
Yeah,
at that time.
Gotcha.
All right, guys. Well, I think I need something to drink. My throat's getting so dry.
Yeah, so I don't know. So there's another comment. I don't know what any of that means. It just cracked me up. Is that a show or a cartoon or something?
So hang on. It says Tiffin's quite a bit south, but close to Iowa City. Okay.
I don't know what the cracker factory thing means.
Okay.
It just kind of cracked me up earlier because I thought it was like a saying. Like you think you're the smartest person in the world. But apparently I have no idea because I don't know who Millhouse is or whatever. I don't know. I'm just rambling on. Don't listen.
Yes, you are. Okay. Well, you guys, we love y'all, and we were happy to see you again this Tuesday. We're kind of gearing up. I had another show I was going to do tonight, but then I realized it's got a lot more to it that I need to kind of learn about before we can confidently present it to you. He's saying Simpsons. So Millhouse is a character in Simpsons. Millhouse.
Okay. All right. So I'm over here laughing at stuff I don't even know about. I'll just be quiet. It just cracked me up the way it was worded earlier.
All right, guys. Again, we love y'all and thank y'all for showing up tonight. And if you are watching on YouTube, great. If you are listening, you can download and listen to us wherever you stream podcasts. You can follow me on Andrea Up Late YouTube channel or Instagram of the same name or a Yahoo email address of the same name as well. Look for Night Shift and download it if you would, wherever you listen. That would help a lot. Also, you can follow Brian at Brian Sanders Disruptors on Instagram and YouTube. And from there, you can learn all about his website and his trainings and all the things that he does separately. That's not only for law enforcement, it's also for civilians. So check him out, check that stuff out. And I think we're good here, right?
I do too.
All right. Would you like to tell the people good night?
Good night, everybody.
All right, guys. Well, thank y'all again. And until next week, we will see y'all next Tuesday. Good night, y'all.